Well, Bاسم,
Piers.
it's good to see you.
It's good to see you too.
Last time, obviously, we did it remotely.
Yes.
You were here. I was in London, and you complained that it was an unfair situation. You couldn't see me. Your earpiece kept falling out.
Yes.
So I thought, okay, fair enough. I hear you. I got on a plane. I flew 6,500 miles. And not only that, we're doing it in somewhere that is very familiar to you. It's the Comedy Store in Los Angeles, where you performed many times as a stand-up. So I've done my bit.
You did. But actually, this is not the first time we meet in person.
No, we did originally in London last year.
And I know that many people are watching this for the first time. I would know this, but like I would really love to tell the story of that moment because I was having a tour in the UK and Europe, and I was doing my English stand-up. And one of my, advertising promotion plan was to come on your show. So my agent called me, it's like, Bاسm, you're going to be on Piers Morgan. I said, damn. It's like, what's wrong? It's like, well, Piers Morgan blocked me on Twitter.
I did.
And he said, like, what did you do? I said, well, during January 6th, the insurrection, you tweeted something about it. And I was so angry at what's happening. And I remember you having you and Donald Trump in a picture. And I said the guy who had Donald Trump with him, whatever. And then I used like very harsh words. And of course, you blocked me. And then I said, like, does he know? I don't know. Does he know? I don't know. Does he know? I don't know. So I walked into the studio, and the moment I was like being seated and they're preparing before we go on air, and you said, "Oh, hi, Bاسm. It seems that you have more followers than me, but it seems that I blocked you. Why?" And I told you, and then we said the story on air. And it was funny because I made the joke, I was like, you have always been standing against cancel culture, and you just canceled me on Twitter. But we agreed that this is not canceling because this is your own space and you're free, but now you're unblocked me, and we're
here.
We're here.
And it was, and actually we agreed about January the 6th, by the way, just for the record. I was, don't know about you, maybe you weren't surprised, I was completely staggered by the response globally to our interview several weeks ago. Were you taken aback by the scale of it?
Yes, of course, but I understand why. For many years, the media covering the Middle East has been showing a certain point of view. I'm not going to say bias, but I would say it did not allow certain voices, voices from the other side to be heard. And that is why you see the frustration. Whenever you speak to people in the Middle East, they tell you the same thing. They're not very happy with the coverage of the Middle East because our voices are not heard. Now, I am the least qualified person ever to talk about this conflict. And yet, just because I relate some of the talking points that we say and we hear the whole time, people felt heard. And when people have this feeling, they're happy. They have this response. They say, like, oh my God. For the first time, the West are actually hearing our point of view. Some of the point of view might not go well with other people, but at least we have a conversation. And I think that is the reason why people reacted that way.
It's such an incendiary subject matter. I've never seen social media so ablaze with hostility on both sides. Did you actually, as well as enormous praise from the Arab world, did you also get criticized by some parts of the Arab world for not going perhaps hard enough?
Oh, you didn't do that, you didn't do that. The thing is, this is like, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you're not.
Right.
If you don't speak up, why don't you speak up? If you speak up, you didn't speak up enough. If you're done, why are you if you speak up too much, oh, you're taking all the attention on you. And I love that fact because people always who accuse people of being the center of attention, they are actually not very happy that the attention is not on them. This is actually like a rule on social media. But yeah, there was a backlash, but there was also a backlash from the other side, which I mean, here and other comedy clubs, I worked with people from all kinds of different backgrounds, Jewish, Christians, Muslims, Arabs, atheists, all kinds of people. And there are a lot of people who went into my socials like, oh, so you're a terrorist sympathizer now, And I think it is important to have a nuanced, deep, interesting, intelligent conversation. A lot of people waiting for this are kind of like, yeah, Bاسm, bury Piers, show him. And this is the problem with the news today. The problem is the news today, it's not about the news anymore. It's about the people giving you the news. So it becomes a show, a circus. Two gladiators in the Colosseum, two pigs fighting in the mud. And this is why people don't get anything out of it. It's a circus.
You know, one of the things I heard a lot was, who is this guy? And they weren't talking about me.
Sometimes I wonder.
Now, obviously, you're very, very well known in the Arab world. You're known as the kind of, they called you the Arab Jon Stewart, and you're well known in America, but you weren't that well known, for example, in the UK. And I think what this interview did, it made a lot of people think, wow, all right, this is incredible, but tell me more about Bاسm Youssef. And I did a bit of research into your life, and it is a fascinating journey that you've gone on to get here to Los Angeles. And I think it's worth just taking a little beat here to talk about this, because you began in Cairo as a heart surgeon. I mean, that was your career path.
Yes.
And,
yes.
And you were a heart surgeon.
I was a heart surgeon until, I spent 19 years in that career, 7 years in medical school, 12 years as a practicing doctor. And 2011 happened, and the revolution happened, and I had my own show on YouTube. I did like small videos.
Well, I'm going to come to this, because I was by coincidence, I had just joined CNN to replace the great Larry King. And I hadn't actually done any live show. I'd done a few weeks since I joined of taped interviews with big names, Donald Trump, Oprah Winfrey, things like that. And I was flying back to Los Angeles when I got a message that Egypt was going up in the start of the Arab Spring. And I actually went to a studio very near here, about a mile down the road on Sunset, the CNN studio, the old Larry King studio. And I went live for the first time, and it was about the Arab Spring, and it was about what was happening in Egypt. And at the same time, you, in Egypt, were actually in Tahrir Square, helping wounded protesters, actually medically treating them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this was a kind of movement that inspired a lot of Egyptians. At the time, I was in the hospital, and a lot of people just had volunteered. And the nurses were just like giving us like supplies, go, go, go. And we were going there, and we were basically tending to the wounded, because it is, and it kind of gives you a different perspective when you see helpless, defenseless people who are not armed, who are being beaten by security forces, military forces, being shot, being, hurt. And all we can do is just like provide some medical attention. And it kind of gives you a perspective to see how humanity sometimes can show its most ugly face.
And the suppression of free speech, freedom of expression.
Yeah.
The ability of people to say what they honestly feel about a situation.
Yes.
And the suppression of people's basic rights to freedom.
Absolutely, yeah. And that kind of like taught me a lot, and inspired me to do the show. But
Well, you start, it's a crazy story, this, and I want to tell it, because you just decide to do 5-minute stuff on YouTube.
Yeah.
And you're expecting a few people to watch it. And then literally it just flies, and suddenly you're getting millions of people watching this. And very quickly, one of the big networks comes in, and then you're suddenly doing this stuff for 30 to 40 million people.
Yeah.
Like a third of the entire population of Egypt is tuning in to watch it. You're the biggest star of Egyptian television.
Oh, please.
Well, you were.
Don't stop.
I mean, what an extraordinary thing, though, for a heart surgeon to go from helping protesters medically in Tahrir Square, the start of the Arab Spring, to within a year, you're the biggest star on Egyptian television. It's a crazy thing.
It doesn't sound as glamorous as this. It felt horrible.
Did it? Why?
Oh yeah, overnight fame, this
Scary.
size, it's toxic, terrible, terrible. It corrupts. It goes into your soul, and it's not good. It's not. I actually didn't enjoy it. And the worst part about it is that like you're trying to do comedy in very controversial climate about very controversial issues. So you'll never satisfy people. And the problem is that people have these expectations. Oh, if you are successful in this, you must be successful at solving this. And when things are not solved, because politics, as you know, very difficult to solve, that expectation, this love turns into hate. And this is one of many reasons that I had to leave, and I came here eventually.
Well, let's just take people through what happened, because they probably don't know, a lot of people. So during the presidency of Mohammed Morsi, who was a democratically elected Islamist, you had relative freedom to start, but then the more you went after government propaganda, the more you stood up for the people against the government, then the trouble started. Morsi wanted to shut you up. You eventually get dragged through the courts.
For one day, it was a warrant for my arrest, and then I turned myself in, and I was interrogated, and it was the funniest interrogation ever. And in my stand-up shows, I talk about that scene.
Because the guards were reading the stuff out and laughing, right?
Well, the guards were taking selfies with me, which is funny. Right. the exchange between me and the prosecutor, general prosecutor, was extremely funny. I mean, I don't like to victimize myself. I don't like, oh, look at that. I actually like to find humor.
But why were you arrested? What was the criteria?
Oh, yeah. I think the list was insulting Islam, insulting the president, spreading false rumors, and disrupting the fabric of society. And it was, I think the people in the room didn't know what to do with me because they ended up discussing my jokes. So it turned into a writer's room. And I was kind of like, how do you think we make this funnier? And it was the funniest exchange ever. And after 6 hours, I was let go. And
was it scary though at the same time that suddenly the machinery was getting a grip of you? Because it was to get a lot scarier. But was it in that moment when you first got arrested, you thought, I'm being arrested for breaching my freedom of speech, right?
For some reason, I just like went with the flow. I went to the interrogation wearing the big hat. I went to the show. It was just, I just wanted this to be a farce because I just like, you're really coming after the comedian. And I just tried to enjoy myself, but deep inside I was dying.
Well, it gets serious enough where you may have died because actually Morsi gets, of course, deposed. In comes General El-Sisi in a coup, a military coup, and he doesn't find satire a laughing matter, particularly when the jokes are about him. You get blocked. They literally block your show from airing.
I aired one episode, and it's interesting. This is a very interesting story because the first episode that was aired after the removal in the Muslim Brotherhood, everybody was waiting to see what I would say. Because by that time, all of the Islamic channels that were, I mean, like me and Islamic channel, like it's like they had 5 channels and they were like me and them going like that. They had like 5 channels that have only 1 hour a week. And then they were removed. And then a lot of the other dissident voices were also being shut down. Now, people are waiting. What will Bassem say? And on the day that the show aired, the next day I went out and everybody's like, good, at least somebody is speaking. It was a very controversial episode. Nobody liked it. And yet everybody liked it because people said like, you're supporting the coup. No, you're the Muslim Brotherhood. Everybody accused me of something. All I did in that episode was just being a mirror of what is happening in the street and showing them how ridiculous it is.
You didn't take a fixed position.
Well, my position, depending on what's your position?
What did you intend your position?
My position was to show the ridiculousness of how the people now was like, oh, we got rid of Islamic fascism, but we are heading towards another fascism. There was a song that I did that was very controversial. People, and it's very funny. The pro-Muslim Brotherhood thought that this is a disrespect to the people who died, and on the other side, the people said that this is a disrespect to the army. And when you manage to offend everybody, you know you're right.
Yes.
And then the people in the middle, it's like, oh, you weren't tough enough. And I was told, it's like, why didn't you go after? The ceiling of freedom just went down, and I was just like, it was very difficult. It is very difficult to go against an authority that was very popular at the time.
And especially a military authority with
a
lot of experience of weaponizing these situations.
Yeah.
You had death threats.
People would always choose, most of the time, they will always choose the military form rather than the religious form because they kind of like, at least they are not infringing on my personal freedom. Not yet. But
you had threats on your life, didn't you?
Oh, all the time. I don't talk about that because like I have been having death threats, like, never stopped since 2011. Never stopped.
Have they continued since our last interview?
Oh, yeah. They never stopped.
People threatening to kill you?
All the time.
Why? For what reason?
Oh, for just saying something that they don't like. Oh, because you are against Egypt, you're against Islam, you're against our president, you're against God. It never stops. It never stops.
It doesn't bother you?
I mean, if you die, you die. You know? If you die, you die. I mean, since when, whatever, like, no bodyguards deflected a bullet. you know, maybe the guy who was with Ronald Reagan. But
Yeah.
I think it's like whatever. Even like at a certain point, I actually had like private security. And then I told them I can't. I cannot live like that. If that's my destiny, if I die, I'll just die.
You end up with your lawyer saying you've got to get out of here. You've got to get out of Egypt. It's
Yeah.
getting too dangerous.
Yeah.
Something bad's going to happen. You're going to
Yeah.
get arrested again and probably thrown in jail, or someone's going to try and kill you. And you flee to Dubai, and then you end up here in America.
Yes.
Was that always the plan, to eventually come to America, or was it expediency because of what happened?
Well, it's funny that you said that because I visited the United States after the first year of my show. And a doctor that's there, an Egyptian doctor, has been there for a while. I said, listen, Bاسم, you are very visible in the media, and I think you can use that to apply for a green card as a special talent. And I did. And it's like, I have like a huge show in Egypt.
It's actually the criteria, because I have the same.
Yeah.
Is an alien of exceptional ability.
Yes.
Is what they call you.
Yes, we're very
charmingly.
Yes, we're very
We're
exceptional.
exceptionally able aliens.
We are, but we're still aliens.
Yeah, yeah. I know. It always makes me laugh. Like, you can come here, but you are an alien.
You're an alien, but you're exceptional.
Yeah.
And I just applied for it, and I got it. I got the Time 100 that helped bolster my application. And I said, maybe I'm not going to use it. And then when that happens, ooh, the green card came handy. So a lot of people think that I'm here on asylum. I'm not. It was just a strike of luck.
You now do stand-up. You've done it for 5 years. And fascinatingly, you do some of it for an Arab audience.
You have a whole show in Arabic and
an English-speaking version.
Yes.
And they're probably very different, right?
Totally
because
different.
Different sensibilities, different humor,
Yeah.
different crowds,
Yes.
different expectation.
Yes, well, the Arab audience come to my show, they expect that's going to be another version of my show that I did in Egypt, and I said, no, it's my personal story. And that when the Arabs come to my English shows, like they think it's like an English version of the shows, like, no, it's a different story. Even then, this weekend, right before I met you, because of our interview, I sold out Arizona.
Really?
Yes, and I stood, and the first thing I said, like, who here came because of the Piers Morgan show? I was like, I was like, boy, you're gonna be disappointed because this is not about that.
But isn't that amazing? I mean,
Yeah.
that shows the power of that interview.
Yeah.
Resonating even in Arizona here. Amazing.
Yeah, because I don't want to succeed just because of a trending moment of time. It is the same show that I've been working and perfecting, and like any stand-up comedian in the United States, your dream is what? Is to sell your special to platforms like Netflix, to HBO, and you want to get there. Because for me, that was like a rebirth. Because I thought like everything was lost. I came here, I had nothing. As first 3-4 years, it was terrible. The first 2 years I was doing stand-up. Oh, I bombed hard. And I went home crying. I said, I'm not going to make it. And then suddenly I have already a tour. I mean, even before our show, I already had a set tour. And now I'm having like this ability of like talking to people with different languages, talking to all these different languages. The show that I did in Arizona had an incredible mix of Arabs and Americans.
Amazing.
And they came here and they completely, and there a lot of them came, they were Palestinians. And they came with like the Palestinian flags and the keffiyeh, and they thought, it's like, guys, it's like the way, laughter, being good at your job is in its way a way of resistance. Because when you laugh, when you show people that, hey, we have Arab people here, and they are, by the Arabs and Palestinians population in Arizona, one of the most established population in the United States. Arabs in the United States in general, they are like professionals, doctors, engineers, professors. Even the Uber drivers, they are probably were like an engineer or someone very established there, but he had to have like a step down in order to come here and survive. So, I mean, we hardly come find like illegal aliens here or people like came here that were not qualified. So, and this is the problem this is why the reason people were very happy of our interview, because because part of the hate on both sides is that we see the news from a different perspective, and people here see the news from another perspective, and everybody's like, why are those people reacting like this? Because they don't see what the other person sees. And I hope in that interview that we can bridge that gap.
Yes.
Before we end, can I
Yes.
show? Okay, so this is a gift from me and my wife. This is olive oil from the West Bank.
Ah,
Whenever I go to Jordan a lot, but my wife also like, ask for the oil from the West Bank.
It's very good.
It is the best oil ever. And the thing is, the olive trees, they survive up to 600 years. And they are passed from one generation to the other. And it is like a family heritage. And the way that you do it, so this is za'atar. Za'atar is basically thyme, and you add to it sesame and a bunch of herbs. And the way that you eat that, you take like a piece of bread. We don't have to do it now, maybe at the end of the interview.
Yeah, we'll do it, yeah.
And you soak it a little bit in the oil, and then you take the za'atar. And I'll demonstrate here. Chuk, chuk, chuk. And then here.
I love it. Well, I love Arabic food. So at the end of the interview,
you're leaving with this oil. So
I will take that.
It shows that.
Well, thank you. And it's very kind of your wife. Thank you. Thank you very much for me.
Well, I'm the one who bought it, but it's okay.
Obviously, you started the last interview with, I mean, I would argue savagely dark humour involving your wife. How you've been trying to kill her, and she was using your kids as human shields and stuff. And I'll be honest with you.
And I'm still trying to. But you know what? When I failed, you know what I did? I went out to the house and I just like randomly slapped other neighbors.
So, it's interesting.
By mistake.
Now this time I'm ready for you, okay? This time I'm ready for the humour.
Oh, you're ready, okay.
No, but it's interesting because last time I was very taken aback. And I remember thinking as you were doing this right off the top, I remember feeling very uncomfortable, unusually uncomfortable, and thinking I didn't know how to react to that. I didn't know whether I was supposed to laugh or be silent, and I sort of ended up sort of slightly grimacing, half laugh and listening. And then I realized it was very powerful what you were doing. It was satirical, but it was savagely satirical and extremely effective. And that's why I think the interview did so well. But I'm not going to pretend that I found it easy to listen to it or to react to it, because I didn't.
You know why? Because all I did was just take the talking points that's been in the media, not just for after October 7th, all through the conflict. It's always like, we need to kill it. All right. You need to kill 5? No, kill 10. You need to kill some? No, kill all. This is what satire does. It take reality, flip it on its head, exaggerate it, and then you can see how sometimes very uncomfortable and even sometimes stupid that sounds. Because I was just reacting to whatever the media is telling me. It's like, oh yeah, okay, let's do it. There's no pushback. So suddenly, the person who's proposing the most extreme measures is like, oh, we'll take it back. Oh, no, that's too much. So that was like a very simple technique. I just took the talking point and just exaggerated it.
It was devastatingly effective, I think.
Yeah.
First, before we go any further, how is your wife's family? Because she is half Palestinian.
Yeah.
Are they okay?
They're good. They're good. They are safe for now.
Yeah.
As like the last week, there was no internet, as you have.
Yes.
You know, I saw you tweet at the IDF. It's like, how can they know?
You know how many views that tweet's had? Nearly 40 million.
Yeah.
Me just saying, how are they going to see this message if you've cut the internet off?
Yeah. I'm wondering if the IDF's like, why aren't the Palestinians liking my tweet? Because they don't see it.
Right. No, but I thought that was a perfectly correct assessment of it.
Yeah.
But the reaction to that tweet I did was enormous, as everything is in this thing. And I had a lot of people say, finally, Piers, you get it, right? Finally, you get it. And I wanted to say, listen, I'm trying to reach a place where I get this, but it's an incredibly complicated issue for someone who is not Arabic or Jewish to poke their head into. And I've had to cover it as a journalist for a long, long time. I think I said to you before that I was editor of a Daily Mirror in England when we opposed the Iraq War, for example. So, you know, I have taken stands on this thing. On this one, I find, and I'm going to be completely straight with you, I discussed this with Jordan Peterson this week, and he did a pretty incendiary tweet in which he said, give them hell, Netanyahu, enough is enough. And he was actually very self-reflective about that in the interview we did this week, where he later issued a 20-minute video, because he said sometimes a one-line tweet can be unnecessarily inflammatory to people. Much better to take time to explain it. Here's where I've got to with this conflict now. I viewed what happened on October the 7th as an absolutely appalling atrocity, a terror attack of unimaginable horror. And I absolutely think that Israel has a right to defend itself from the people who committed it, Hamas. And I've questioned for the last 3-4 weeks, what is a proportionate response? And I have said repeatedly, I don't know the answer. I want people who have a view to have a view about that. And I'll ask you again about where you think we are with this. I also acknowledge that Hamas live amongst civilian population in Gaza. And therefore, if you do what the Israelis are currently doing, which is a ground offensive into Gaza, a lot of civilians are going to get killed. And at what point does that become disproportionate or even illegal? And I don't know the answers to those questions. And I have a moral quandary because my instinct is to say that Israel has no choice but to respond to what happened in a very forceful manner. I understand why they want to eliminate Hamas altogether. I understand that if they feel they can, then perhaps we can move to a two-state solution or peace or whatever it may be, although I don't think Netanyahu will ever be the person to do that. But the moral question for me is, at what point does this become disproportionate? And when you see thousands of children being killed in Gaza, it fills me with utter horror. And then people say, well, do you condemn it? And I find it very easy to condemn Israel turning off the water, Israel turning off the power. I think it's ridiculous that Israel should have that power over millions of people who are not part of their country. I think it's terrible what's happening in the West Bank with the settlers. I think that the stuff there is completely easy to condemn. But can I, hand on heart, condemn Israel trying to destroy Hamas after what they did on October the 7th? That is where I'm struggling to find myself saying I condemn it, because I believe that they are right to try and destroy Hamas. Now, what do you feel about my moral quandary?
Well, there's a lot of points, very lot, and I think this will kind of like lay the ground rules for that interview. There is a whole thing about like, is it right to defend itself, the condemnation. First of all, let's start with condemnation.
Yes.
You want my opinion?
Yes.
Condemning Hamas or condemning Israel?
Yes.
Completely useless. Completely useless.
Why?
I condemn Hamas, you condemn Israel, interview's over. What happened? Nothing. It is just checkpoint, like morality checkpoints.
But I've interviewed a lot of pro-Palestinians, for example, some of whom will immediately say, I unreservedly condemn the terror attacks of October the 7th, and then go on to criticize Israel. And I think that's it's a position I can completely respect.
Yeah.
But I find it much harder to respect a pro-Palestinian guest on my show if they simply resolutely refuse to say that they can condemn the terror attacks.
Yes.
I find that less worthy of respect.
But you see, this is the problem with the news. We go into the circular motion of the same answer. One thing that I have noticed, not just on the coverage of these events, the events before and before and before, every time this starts, people say, we don't know what's happening. It's a very complicated situation. Right. What is happening now? And for me, as a viewer, if a conflict that's been there for 75 years and the media with all this technology has been covering it and we hear the same exact words, we don't know what's happening. It's complicated. It's a very complex. That is a failure of the media apparatus. That is the failure to themselves and for the audience, because why every time this happens, it seems like it is happening from point zero. And I think to help understand that, I will get to the October 7th. I will get to the condemnation. I will get to the self-defense. But I think maybe we can we have like all the time in the world, and we can discuss, this interview could be a bookmark, landmark for maybe looking at that conflict in a deeper way that nobody had gone there before. We had the views, we have people waiting. Yes. You know, as I said, I'm the least qualified to discuss that, but it's an opportunity to use it.
I'm not massively well qualified myself.
Yeah, both of us. I mean, look at us.
I'm an Irish Catholic.
I mean, look at us. Yeah, two privileged people. One white, one white wannabe, discussing the most complex conflict of our history. But I want to start in a totally different area. I want to start with anti-Semitism.
Yes.
I think it's an important issue.
Yes.
I think there is a rise of anti-Semitism in the world, and I think there is. This is very dangerous. And I, as a Muslim, who has been through events where there were terrorist attacks somewhere, and that reflects on us, I can completely feel that. Since what happened, I had text messages from the Jewish friends. Are you okay? Are wife's family okay? And I was texting them. Are you okay? And I think it is very important to agree on the language because the word anti-Semite has been used and abused, and most of the time not for the good interest of the Jewish people. Because the first 2 days of the coverage, I watched the news, and there was a lot of protest that was led by Jewish Voice for Peace, and they were led by people who opposed the Israeli attack on the civilians. And I remember quite well, many of the Republican representatives in Congress came out and they were calling these the global intifada, the global jihad. I love it when they say jihad. They sound like a horse. Jihad. It's very funny. Or they say like, these are, and I quote, Iranian-backed jihadists. And I said, wait a minute, but most of those people are Jewish. Those people who took over the Capitol, the same people who took over Central Station in New York, which is known as the biggest civil disobedience event in America in the last 2 decades, they were all Jewish. And then I find Nikki Haley saying anti-Zionism equals anti-Semitism. And then I remember it's like, oh, Jewish people in America are saddened by the fact that they are not citizens of America or citizens of the world, but they are citizens of Israel, and they have to back Israel in whatever they do. And these are not my words; these are the words of Jon Stewart. He went down and he said it is very, very important to divide these two. And what is very, very interesting.
Would you compare that on that specific point to the way that people try and say all Palestinians are responsible and accountable for what Hamas do?
Yes, yeah.
In other words, I think you can be very critical of Israeli government and their policies and Benjamin Netanyahu and the politicians, but that doesn't mean that you have to take that criticism to innocent Israelis who may have exactly the same criticism themselves.
And this is why it is very important to have these kind of discussions, because the saddest thing that I saw is the people that were in so much support of Israel are anti-Semite themselves. MTG, Marjorie Taylor Greene, you know, she said like, oh, I send my aides, and they took pictures of the protesters. Basically, she's surveilling protesters. And Marjorie Taylor Greene is very known for a very famous post in 2018 where she blamed the California fires on a Jewish space laser gun. Do you remember that? Do you remember that? I was just like, oh, they were burned because Jewish investors, Rothschild and Feinstein, anything that ends with Stein, because that's of course sounds Jewish, they put a satellite and shooting laser beams to. It's possible. And not just her. You have Steve Skoulas. Thank you so much. He is now the Speaker of the House, and he has been invited before for an organization that was funded by David Duke, the founder of the KKK. You have Kevin McCarthy, who is the former minority speaker, leader of the Republican Party in the House, and he accused Jewish billionaires of rigging the midterm. So how come those people are accusing us of anti-Semites? So here's the thing. So let's go to the equation that Nikki Haley put on Twitter. Anti-Zionism equals anti-Semitism. No, it is true. People who hate Jews, they're also anti-Zionists. It is true. And you could be someone who hate Zionists, who don't like Zionism, and you are Semite. You could even be Jewish. And guess what? You could be a Zionist, like those people, supporting Israel, and at the same time you hate the Jews, because the chant, Jews will not replace us, these echoed in Charlottesville. It did not echo in Gaza. I mean, in Gaza they say worse stuff in between the bombing, on their downtime. And these are the same people who are seen with Nick Fuentes, with Stephen Bannon. And you know what's most interesting?
Trump had him for dinner at Mar-a-Lago.
And all of those people are buddies with Benjamin Netanyahu. So how does this work? How does this work? And you know the people who speak against this, like Jon Stewart, like Bernie Sanders, like Naomi Klein, what do they call these people? What do they call them? Self-hating Jews. And you know what else now they call them? They call them capos. Capos. You know what's capos? Capos, basically these were the Jewish inmate in Auschwitz that were forced by the Nazis to stand as guards on their own inmates. You see how degrading this is. And this is the way to shut down conversation. Anti-Semite, Islamophobe, you hate America, you hate the military, you hate Egypt, war on Christmas. This is how you shut an environment that does not allow disagreement is not an environment made for
Let me
growth.
a-
It's an
okay.
environment made for control.
Let me ask you this. Say, take the student protests in
Yes, sir.
America, universities. I have no problem instinctively with students protesting. It's actually part of the DNA of being a student, right? But I do have a problem with two things. One, the protests that happened almost immediately after October the 7th, within hours, which were clearly, deeply, deliberately inflammatory and hurtful to Jewish people. Secondly, I have a real problem with the students who were beaming direct pro-Hamas slogans onto buildings on campuses in America. You know, I'm all for free speech, and I really am. The whole show is predicated on that. But not to the point where you see Jewish students barricaded into libraries because a mob is descending on them. There is a distinction to me between people who are obviously overtly, I mean, there was a professor at Cornell University who was literally seen in public shouting how exhilarated he felt by the attacks of October the 7th. He still hasn't been fired, that guy. I think that crosses a line. Do you?
Yeah, I do not like this way